is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. A multi-limbed green god, part ibex, part insect, presides over a pool of beer atop a cliff, pouring the golden liquid into a drinking horn held on the shoulders of a satyr, where it overflows into a boiling cauldron on the shore of a river. A dryad with tree limbs growing from her abdomen plucks hops from the beard of a spectral moose. Voyagers embark onto the river in small boats from the moose's back, rounding the cliff upon which the green god's vat of beer rests, and just visible in cave openings on the cliff face are dwarves tirelessly mining treasures from the rock. Do the tiny, faceless forms populating the landscape understand the cosmic machinations that have brought them this drink of the gods? The scene is depicted on a 9-foot by 16-foot mural hanging over the bar at Rabid Brewing in Homewood, Illinois, a southern suburb of Chicago. Hand-painted by artist Annabelle Popa, the mural's merging of mythologies, both historical and invented, perfectly captures the aesthetic both of Rabid and of its founders, husband and wife team Tobias Cichon and Rosado. This oddly seamless blend of wonder and irreverence is displayed in everything the pair do, their earnest vulnerability merging with occasional off-color humor in conversation, their love for fantastical artwork sharing space with full-body Tyrannosaurus and panda costumes in their taproom. I'll explain more about both in a minute. In today's episode, we'll get to the heart of what makes Rabid Brewing a reflection of its imaginative and open-hearted founders. The Rabid Brewing taproom sits at the end of an unassuming office park behind a big box store just off the highway in Homewood, Illinois. Across a small field beside the brewery, the earth opens into a giant rock quarry, and the brewery will sometimes host movie screenings or live music in this small grassy oasis in between the concrete expanse of a commercial suburb and the massive scar in the earth that provided the building materials for this and countless other suburbs just like it. Rabid is a small refuge of the weird and wonderful. You enter the front door and your eyes look up to the huge mural telling the mythical backstory of Rabid's beer, and then they fall to the smaller but no less remarkable macabre accents around the space. Strange skulls adorned with too many horns, nightmare beings drawn in chalk, a small cardboard cutout of Tom Selleck. The tap list is filled with imaginative names like Lilliputian Warfare, Cobra Combat Serum, and Gnome Runner. The Rabid taproom is just 10 minutes from my in-laws' house, so I've spent many evenings in this space laughing with Raiye and Tobias, and they're some of my favorite people in craft beer. They're sometimes brash and brazen, but also vulnerable and sincere, like tender beating hearts armed with sabers or sarcasm depending on which is needed in a given moment. Raiye is a member of her local roller derby team, the Ileana Derby Dames, and her derby name is Your Mom, just for the entertaining sentences that result from this when the announcer is commentating her activity on the rink. Early in the COVID pandemic, when Rabid pivoted to delivering beer to customers, Raiye would make deliveries in a full T-Rex head costume. Customers caught on to the fun and started sharing videos of these dino beer deliveries on social media, which Raiye in turn played up by doing a little dinosaur dance for each house. Tobias is an avid fan of fantasy and mythology and has been a creative writer all his life. The beers he brews fit into an organized mythology in his head, which he hopes to write down into a complete fictional depiction of this imagined world soon. He's a fan of Grand Sumo wrestling, and Saturday nights find Grand Sumo projected onto the walls of the Rabid taproom. More than a gimmick, regulars have picked up on the nuances of the sport and have started cheering on their favorite wrestlers. Rabid's 4-year anniversary was October 13th, so I sat down recently with Raiye and Tobias to talk about the imaginative wonder behind their beers and branding, and the love for good beer that set their own relationship on a journey of discovery from the very beginning. My first question for them: why did they pick the name Rabid?
It started with the idea of a rabid god, and then we made a beer called Hair of the God, and then we thought, hey, let's create a brewery and call it Rabid God. And then we got some investors. and that changed things a little bit. So we ended up just trimming it down to Rabid, which honestly I think works out a little bit better.
And as I understand it, the brewery has its origin story in your relationship, right?
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah. Ray and I, we started dating back in 2010, and I had her over to my house. We were going to have like a little barbecue and stuff. And I went out to the store. I was like, I'll be right back. I'm going to go pick up some beer. Came back with a 12er of Miller Lite, and she just looked at me, let out a sharp bark of a laugh, and said, no, honey, no. Come on, we're going back to the liquor store. And she took me back there and bought, I think we bought some like Apocalypse Cow and some Alpha Free Floyd's Brewery. And we went back, and she actually taught me how to drink a beer, how to what, not just, guzzle it down because it's alcohol, and but how to really appreciate the different things, from what I'm looking at to what I'm smelling and what I'm tasting and how it feels in my mouth. All these things she actually made me pay attention to. And at that point, my eyes just like popped open. I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. That's where that began. Once we started going to liquor stores and just like picking up various beers that we wanted to try out. This was in 2010. So the boom wasn't that big yet. It was just barely starting. Eventually, I just got this sense of like, this is what I want to taste in my beer. This is how I want, this to feel. I got to the point where I was like, you know what? When I was like 10 years old, I used to help out my dad with his home brewing. I bet you I could do it too. And so I did. We made a triple IPA, right? It was 11%. Hit the ground running with an 11% IPA. And it ended up being great. The real moment was a little bit later though. And we went out on our honeymoon. And I said, okay, now that we finally got through all of that, I think we need a 5-year plan. What do you want to do? And how about we open a brewery? And
awesome.
So that began our great adventure right there.
So Ray, you set him on the right path then?
She really did. Yeah. This was all her fault.
Now, did you know that the grand opening happened exactly 4 years and 50 weeks after that weekend?
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. So you made it within the 5-year plan.
Yeah, within the 5 years.
Barely.
Just barely. And we'll talk about this specifically with some of your beers, but one of the things I love about Rabid is the broad interest in mythology and the ways that you bring that in at the brewery. Before we get into specifics, can you just talk about your general interest in mythology and how that tied into the brewery originally?
I've been a creative writer since I was in high school, and mythology always appealed to me. The archetypes that were used, I was a big fan of Star Wars when I was a little kid, and learning about all the archetypes used in that and how stories are built, how myths are built, always fascinated me. And I loved stuff that was out of my reach. Common, everyday, modern dramas never really interested me much because I've got that myself. I can live it, but I can't live this other stuff.
Ray, I know one of the striking details of the tap room when you first walk in is that gigantic mural over the bar with all the different fanciful creatures and everything else. Can you explain that to us a little bit and how you guys got that?
When people ask me about our brand, oftentimes they want to distill it down into this one thing, and they want to say, oh, you're a metal place, or you're a punk place, or you're a D&D place, or pagan or whatever. And I like to say that it's about all of that. It's about all of the great mythological traditions and the passion that the people who believed in those traditions had. To me, that's what Rabid is.
Yeah.
And my personal interest, like you are the storyteller, but I've been very interested in religions for as long as I can remember. But what I think where it sort of lines up is, in a sense, I feel like we have created our own mythological universe where we have called on all of the great traditions, and then where one didn't exist, we wrote our own. And that's kind of what I feel like this mural is all about. It's the creation of beer as we see it. There is, there is a satyr-like creature who's working on the mash, and there is a dryad-like creature who is gathering the hops and but there is all of this mythology that's going on all around it. Most of those myths actually steeped in beers that we made in our first year of existence. But then there's even kind of a little bit of a representation of the rabid god, the creature who is, possibly in charge of all of this. So that's kind of what's going on up there.
Yeah,
so,
we're actually looking at it right here. So.
Do those two characters represent anything specific for the brewery? The satyr.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a tie-in to them being representative of both me and Ray. But aside from that, the satyr is all about
the party.
Yeah, he is the fun bringer, and so that is really kind of what we wanted the spirit of this place to be. A poetic hub of fun. So the satyr is definitely where we wanted to start. And then we have other characteristics about our brewery, I think, that we do care for people and we are like family for people. And I think the dryad brings a lot of that kind of imagery into it as well.
You mentioned other details around the brewery. Can you briefly share some of the other mythological accents around the space?
Sure. Well, I mean, really it starts with our cans, but we've got some mythological boars, basically boar heads, just different shaped tusks coming out of different places. And we've got a ceremonial death mask with a giant tusks that come out really low. We've got, like this piece behind us, this was actually done by a couple of our tattoo artists. This one in particular was done by Ivan Thomas. Because of the nature of it being chalk, told people, yeah, the art around here is going to change once in a while. We have had people yell at us. That's the thing. People get really passionate about art.
Tobias and Ray are just as passionate about art, and that led to their ongoing relationship with New York-based artist Annabelle Popa. I spoke with Annabelle recently about how her partnership with Rabid began, her process for creating the Rabid taproom mural and other pieces, and her love for the fantastical. So, Annabelle, can you share with me a little bit of how you got involved with Rabid Brewing?
So it was a couple of years ago. I was still I think it was junior or senior year in college. My boyfriend at the time, his mother was very close friends with Ray. And they mentioned something about looking for an artist. And she was like, oh, yeah, my son's girlfriend is an artist. And of course, the first reaction is when you have a family member say that, you're like, oh, they're not really going to be a good artist. And it's,
right.
A funny little thing. But I was studying illustration at the time. And my passion is mythology, folklore, monsters, creatures. I would be drawing satyrs every day and dragons. And that was just kind of how I started. And so when we were connected, Ray was like, oh, shoot, this is exactly what we've been looking for. And so since then, it's just kind of anytime they need some labels or anything, I do my best to riff off of whatever they create as well.
So one of the most striking features of their tap room is the large mural hanging behind the bar by the ceiling. And I understand that was your creation. Can you tell me a little bit about conceiving that, creating that, and then walk me through what we're seeing in that mural?
When we were first talking about designs, characters, vision, the general vibe of the mural, I think they had their main character, Kaz, who is the satyr. They had him kind of solidified, but there's this other secondary character named Promethea who is in the mural, but that was kind of, I think, right before we had finalized her design. Mm-hmm. And so we knew that we had these two characters that we wanted to kind of build the narrative around. And Tobias was mentioning how he may eventually want to create comics or different kind of narratives and stories around each beer name, but that the mural was more I guess, the basis for the world. So the mural, there's a lot of little hidden things in it. They had, I don't know exactly how many specific brews at that point, but there was maybe Dwarves of Doom. And so somewhere in the mural, there's these little dwarves with the dwarf logo. I think it was maybe in the cliff somewhere. And so I tried to incorporate a little bit of everything just to kind of create this world building of all these different brews that they would continue on. My favorite part, just because I love animals, was this weird moose god that they were harvesting the hops from, and that you have these constellations in between the horns, and even there was another character with these big horns. So that was kind of my little bit that I added to it, kind of creating these ultimate celestials that then these two characters would harvest, whether it was I think the other horned god had like the initial beer and kind of like this juice and kind of weird liquid from another world. So that was kind of them as, I guess, Kaz and Promethea, kind of Tobias and Raiye, taking from these larger characters that are like symbols of the universe or something bigger. And so that was just trying to create like a really larger narrative mythology that maybe eventually we can continue to pull from if we need to with other beers, but central to like the two main characters.
Yeah, that is very cool. And how big is that mural?
I think it's about 9 feet tall and 16 feet wide.
So that's a huge surface. Can you share just a little bit about your process of how you go about working on that large of a piece?
Yeah, so that was actually normally I don't really have a studio, but I had been able to find like a really big wall in one of the bedrooms that I was living in at the time. And so I had to kind of like move the bed, move everything around, put paper down, and then I had to like nail or staple up the mural to the wall. And the edges were kind of like curving. It was very like classic sketchy artist kind of thing. But and then at that point I obviously had already sketched it and planned it out, and so at that point it's just painting it much larger on the canvas. So it's doing the artist thing. But it's funny because always with those larger things, if you're not actually working on the physical wall itself, having a canvas that large is kind of hard to find like a flat wall that is that big.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned that you've also done some label art for Raiye and Tobias. Can you share maybe some of your favorites for those? And then also, how does working on that medium differ from the art that you're normally making, you know, painting a canvas or something?
So far, the 3 ones that we created, the Horse Revenge was the very first one, the Imperial IPA, and that one was really fun to do because that was like the first one that was, I guess, trying this new medium that I've done a little bit in the past, but not at least for Rabid. Then we had, I think it was Dwarves of Doom, and then the Manticore. So like personally, I am originally a painter, illustrator, but digital art has always been something that I've, you know, taught myself throughout the years. And then I even did many years of graphic design. And so the labels weren't extremely out of my comfort zone. Those might have been even more in my comfort zone just because you can kind of mess with them a little bit more digitally, while painting, once you paint something, it's hard to change it and adjust it. Personally, in terms of working with Rabid, the labels have been much more fun just because they're more flexible and I can kind of add a little bit more detail, add a little bit more style, especially with like the Manticore and Horus. Those were kind of like my own character designs. And the Dwarves as well, but I'm like, I'll draw humans, but it's not as fun for me. So the other 2 having these like monsters that like Raiye and Tobias don't really have maybe a strong connection to them. So it's like they give the artist a little bit more freedom. While when you have your 2 main characters, it's like you have the design that you have to stick to. Ultimately, I was still able to design them, but it's like a little bit more closed parameters.
Sure. So when they bring you a new beer like this that they want you to work on, how much do they guide you on that? I mean, do they just kind of give you the name and say, do what you want? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess, the brew and maybe on how much they already envisioned for that. With Horus, it's more just drawing upon the actual Egyptian mythology. So that was kind of like, they were just, gave me the idea, the character, and said, okay, this is the information, this is the legal stuff, this is what we need. Have fun with it. Dwarves of Doom, I know Tobias was a little bit more, I guess, excited for it. So I kind of did like a very basic dwarf kind of thing. And then he was like, oh, add some glowing, or let's try this color. So he was a little bit more in tune with the designing of that, which is, I find really fun because also as an illustrator, you're really trying to get their kind of view and what they want. And so sometimes it's really helpful to have that feedback. But with Manticore, I just kind of like drew a really cool Manticore, added some little fun things on the side, and they were like, oh, that looks great. Maybe change the snarl. So most of the time it happens very organically.
That organic give and take has allowed for visual expressions of many of the ideas in Tobias's imagination for Rabid's unifying mythology. I asked him to elaborate on that backstory and sketch out some of its components. So you mentioned this a little bit, but I know you have spoken to me before about wanting to write a cohesive mythology that kind of brings all of this together. Can you share a little bit of the vision for that, whether or not you've had a chance to do it yet?
Yeah, sure. Well, all of it is Like location wise, it's vaguely based on our current location, and it uses basically what is Lake Michigan as this kind of magical waters place. There's, a great snake that continues to try to drain the waters, and there are the heroes of the area that try to stop that and continue to give the waters to the rest of the people on the land.
And is your intent for all of your beers, once you can eventually do that, to kind of tie into that and touch on it?
To kind of play into it, yeah, as many as possible. There are a couple that, the naming came out a little bit weird, but those were earlier on. And I think that everything that we're doing now is creating either scenes that may have happened in this mythological land, or referencing, specific creatures or types of creatures.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bono Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half-pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. Sure. So let's talk about some examples with beer names and how you kind of organize those. I know you have the line of angel names for some of your double IPAs and things like that. Can you talk about some of those?
So that's actually a little inaccurate. We actually have what we like to call the Jucifer series of hoppy beers. And all of those Jucifer series beers are named after demons. It freaks some people out, and I have to assure them that we're not Satanists. If there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, I usually have to convince them that it's otherwise and tell them a little story of, why a beer is named the way it is. And, so Firo is one of my favorite ones because it's kind of hard to say. People freak out a little because it's spelled Whiro, but it is pronounced like fear, Firo. And it's named as such because isn't that a demon from New Zealand?
Yep.
Which is where the Wakatu hops that are in that beer is from. And so it's this nice little tie-in. And we actually just canned another beer in that series called Baal, and that's spelled Baal. So
immediately people are calling it Ball.
Right, they want to call it Ball. So we were helping ourselves out, and we on the date code stamp on the bottom, we made it say rhymes with ale.
Nice, good thinking. So let's talk about some of your can artwork then. Does Annabelle do those as well, or do you work with other artists for those?
Annabelle does our bottles, which are more intricate than the cans, but I do all of the cans.
Oh, awesome. Talk a little bit about your process for that. How do you do that artwork?
So, it starts with the name, whatever the name of the beer is going to be. I need to figure that out. If it is part of the Jucifer series, I'll look up the demonology, the sigil for it. And so oftentimes I'll start with that and kind of build around it. Or, I'll do something else, like with Witch Racer that just came out. I decided to take a fighter jet helmet and mask and then create a digital magic circle with various symbols on the inside. At the end of it, it's, would I want to get this tattooed on me? And if I think that it would look good as a tattoo, then that works.
That's an excellent rule of thumb to follow.
Now, you did forget the one part of the process that you let me be part of. And that's the part where you ask me what I think.
That's right.
And where I tell you, and then you usually argue with me, but then you do it. And then what usually happens?
Then I like it.
And then it looks awesome. Right. So
this is all true.
That's great. So one of my favorite things that you do is the Feast of the Goat Queen, which is an event every spring. Ray, can you talk about the background for that and what it involves?
Feast of the Goat Queen is a perfect example of us making up a mythology where one didn't exist. When we first decided to open in a location just, less than 5 miles west of Three Floyds, we wanted to make sure that we were going to capitalize on that fact because they had Dark Lord Day every year. And they were bringing something like 30,000 beer fans to the area. And a lot of them from way out of town. So folks were coming in for the weekends and they were looking for things to do the rest of the weekend. Just to kind of counterbalance Dark Lord Day and all that it is, we were kind of going for a low-key pagan fertility festival is kind of how it was fleshing out. And one of my favorite parts about it, we didn't eat any goats, but we did have baby goats here for petting and drinking beer with. The first year, I don't know if you remember this, but the first year we had the baby goats, they had a young baby that was black, and he had a little star right between his nubs, and they named him after our satyr character. They named him Kazbek.
That's right.
But yeah, it has traditionally just been, a nice party to have that day before. Lots of bands, lots of beer, we were making Horus, which was a 14% triple IPA.
Yeah, 14 and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that beer because it never really tasted like a 14 or 15% beer, which is good and bad. But I loved it because it was one of the first beers that our customers talked about. Like, it is a verb. They would talk about getting Horused.
Yeah, that's right.
Man, I had 2 last night and I was all Horused up.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to doing it again. We had somebody actually that would dress up as the Goat Queen, but I'm not really sure what's going to happen with that going forward. That'll be kind of an interesting thing for us to tease out, because that's the other thing. There might not be Dark Lord Day anymore.
Right.
And so we might really have to sit back and figure out how to make this work for us in the way that, in a world where maybe we go forward without Dark Lord.
Well, I will come up for the Feast of the Goat Queen. So I think I'd rather do that than Dark Lord Day. One beer of particular note for the themes of Bean to Barstool is Dwarves of Doom, a 10% ABV imperial stout brewed with cacao and coffee. As Rabid's own description reads, "The hammers under the mountain have forged the mightiest magical armor, a crushingly smooth stout made from the wizardry of local coffee roasters and chocolatiers." I asked Tobias to explain the background to this beer and the chocolate collaboration behind it.
Yeah, that beer started out as... Well, it started as a recipe from our head brewer, Joe, before he ever worked. And so he said, "Here, this is a great recipe. I've made it a million times. Why don't you try it out?" So I took it and I modified it a little bit according to how I like to make things. So yeah, we always wanted to use like the best kind of stuff we could get our hands on. And so we're just trying different things out. And so since then, we've moved to Smuggler's Coffee, and we've been using them ever since. Recently, we went to Ethereal Chocolate Confectionaries. Well, actually, is it just Ethereal Chocolate?
It's Ethereal Confections.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just call them Ethereal. So,
Sure.
But yeah, so we started using theirs. So they sent us this sample pack of all their cacao, and the cacao, holy cow. This stuff was amazing. We opened it up, and just the burst of chocolate that just came out of these bags was so intense. We're like, all right, well, we got to try this. We definitely need to use this. So we decided to try them out, and they definitely have a really good product.
Which cacao from Ethereal Confections did you use in that beer?
We used the Ecuadorian. It was between that and the Dominican, and we felt that for this beer, the Ecuadorian had a nice, richer, kind of earthier flavor to it that played a little bit better with the coffee that we were using at the time.
Very cool. And where did the name Dwarves of Doom come from?
I was trying to figure out something like, what did this beer remind me of? And it was, it's big, heavy, 10%, and magnificently crafted, and dwarves do all that. I cannot even remember what the other name was at the time. I had 2 names. I came out to my staff and I said, "Hey, you guys, do you think this name or Dwarves of Doom?" Everybody just looked at me, dropped their jaws, and said, "Dwarves of Doom." So it's like, all right, that's it.
I don't know if I told you guys this or if I put this on social media or not, but when I was getting a photo of that beer back in the winter, my grandmother, who died when I was like 13 or 14, when we were going through her house, she had this old like medieval morning star. I have no idea why she had this. It's
Wow.
like the chain with the spiked ball hanging
No
on it.
kidding.
So I have kept it ever since.
That's
So
amazing.
I decided to use it in the photo. So I'm walking around our back shared courtyard with the bomber of beer and this morning star, and all of a sudden like stopped and realized that like all of my neighbors could see me just wandering around the courtyard with this medieval weapon and a bomber of beer. So
That is
worth it for the photo though.
They probably just said, "Oh, there's that Nelson again."
Right. Just shut the curtains.
They expected me.
Have you had the chance to use Ethereal Confections in any other beers?
Yeah, we did. We used them in Shadow Stepper.
Tell me a little bit about that beer.
Well, Shadow Stepper is, I think, our oldest recipe that is in regular rotation. It is a chocolate milk stout. This was my very first stout recipe. So this beer, I started using cow nibs and that as well back in the beginning. And, you know, I would just get whatever I could out of, you know, the local brew shop. You know, they'd have like little, you know, 1 pound packages or something like that. But then I started getting, you know, buying from a wholesaler, and they were all really good. But I think that this last one where we use that, this one is the Ecuador as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I love this beer. It is a 7%er that it has all of the chewy mouthfeel of something a lot bigger. There is lactose, but it's like lactose done the right way. You know, it's not as the main dish. And I love all of the roastiness. I frequently have to argue with people that insist that there must be coffee in it. It gives me this awesome opportunity to tell them what dark roasted malt will do.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah.
this is one of my favorite beers. I love the way that it pours. I love if it gets a nice creamy head on it.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I think I'm at the point now where I'm loath to tell people that there's any lactose in a beer because the expectation is that it's going to come out as a milkshake.
Mhm.
And like, no, you barely can taste it. It's there for other reasons, not to be the main show.
I know in speaking with Marisa from Ethereal Confections previously, she had mentioned that the reason they started marketing to breweries was because they had gone into a homebrew shop and tried the cacao and realized how much better their cacao was. Can you briefly comment on the improvement of being able to use really thoughtfully sourced and processed cacao in the beer versus just a commodity that's out there?
You know, it feels really good to know that, you know, you're not taking part in something that's exploitative. We don't want to do that. And it's hard to figure out that kind of stuff too, when, you know, you just got to go out there and get your ingredients and get the job done. A lot of times, considering where these things are coming from and what the process is for getting them, you know, sometimes it's trickier. And when it comes to more unique ingredients like chocolate and cacao, ingredients that are not coming from the US, you know, you do want to take a good look at what that is.
It also, I don't think matters at all that it's a superior product. I mean, just from my vantage, I felt like there was a greater oil content in the nibs that were coming from Ethereal. You know, there was more. I'm sure they were a lot more expensive, but there was a hell of a lot more bang for the buck. Like, you know, I felt like you were really getting something out of that pound of nibs.
Yeah.
For, you know, pound for pound.
Right.
The aroma of Dwarves of Doom leads with surprisingly bright, fresh coffee for as big of a beer as it's housed in, along with dark bread and roasted grain and some subtle cocoa. The palate carries a good deal of acidity from this trio of roasted ingredients, with subtle spice and a big push of dark roasted coffee. The cacao is mostly incorporated into the roasted malt profile, adding deeper complexity. This beer is bold but complex, loud but light on its feet. The pair's love for the fantastical naturally makes October a favorite month for them. We wrapped up by talking about what this season means to them. So as we head into Halloween, I understand this time of year is significant to both the brewery and to your marriage. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's all you.
Well, our anniversary of our grand opening will come around October 13th. And I can't remember, I think that falls on a Thursday this year. So we're probably going to have to push that off for a couple days, but we're going to have a big ass party, of course, as one does.
Yes,
When they turn 4, they should throw a big ass party. But it is also going to be our anniversary of our wedding on October 27th, and that will be 9 years. But I think probably what you're referring to is that we are just different kind of people. And there was not going to be a tuxedo that was going to satisfy Tobias or a big white dress that was going to make me happy. We had a backyard costume party wedding. And Tobias might have had horns on his head and pointy ears and goatskin chaps. And, I'm sure I had way too much wedding boob.
Oh, your wedding boob was awesome.
But all of our guests were costumed, and it's one of my favorite days ever.
Yeah, absolutely. People keep on talking about it. 9 years.
Sounds awesome. Do you do anything special at the brewery for Halloween?
Generally, we do have Halloween parties every year, yes. And we have Halloween costume contests.
We get some pretty good entries.
Yeah.
Really good entries.
Yeah, we have really had some good ones. One of my favorites that I remember was the machine from Big.
The fortune teller machine?
Yeah. She came
Zoltan.
in. Yeah, Zoltan. Yeah, she came in dressed up as Zoltan with a huge box around her and is totally decked out. And she actually would like spit out like a little card if you push the button. So yeah, it was pretty great.
That's fantastic. What story are you telling with Rabid Brewing?
Down to our logo, which has 2 notches for the 2 of us. This has been about us and about us going out on an adventure together. And that is really what this thing and what our marriage and this venture, what it all has been about, is the 2 of us pairing up, going out on an adventure and taking it out and seeing where it leads.
Right.
You're right that the story is with us at the core, but I feel like the story that we are really telling right now, especially right now, is you have one life and it's short and it goes by so quickly. And so I feel like the story is to go do the thing, go do all of the things.
Yeah.
You go do the things. And I feel like a lot of our friends and family and customers maybe really admire us and they go, oh, you're doing so great. And the thing is, they could do the things too. Maybe their thing isn't a brewery. Yeah. Maybe their thing is something else, but you have to start the journey.
Rosado and Tobias Cichon are doing the things. They're on an adventurous journey together as individuals and as a couple, and a beautiful and at times tenuous endeavor running a small brewery together that reflects who they are. As Tobias mentioned earlier, some of the art in the Rabid taproom is drawn in chalk, and there are spaces of black chalkboard on several walls with bits of chalk lying about. Guests are encouraged to leave their mark. Sometimes that's artwork of surprising skill, other times it's dirty jokes. Everyone is welcome here. Coming through those doors means you're part of the weird family Tobias and Ray have fostered at Rabid Brewing. Step inside, grab a piece of chalk, and write yourself into the Rabid story. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool. Happy hauntings, everyone.